Welcome to Season 2 of Conversations with Jonathan Stockstill.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a podcast with Jonathan Stockstill, where we're having conversations about super important topics like world missions, church growth, family, marriage, but today, parenting. Last time we came to you about parenting, so many people wrote in. They really enjoyed it. It's really a theme that people struggle with these days. It's wild to raise kids in 2023 when I'm filming and recording this podcast. Today, I'm so pumped to have a friend, one of our pastors on staff, Pastor Dustin West. What's up, dude?
Man, I'm doing good. Excited to be here. Have a conversation with Jonathan Stockstill. Pumped about the topic.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of parenting. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And so we're in the thick of it. So I'm living this out every day.
I just want to say, I think you're doing a great job being a dad.
Thank you.
I watch you with your kids, and you're amazing.
It's the most challenging thing in 35 years of living, but at the same time, when you have kids, you realize, like, this is what I'm called to do, is raise these children, steward what God has gifted us with well. And I love my kids, man. They frustrate you.
Yeah.
But I love them to death.
No, man, they're incredible. So you have 3 kids. I have 4 kids. Mm-hmm. We have a little experience on the topic.
A little bit.
Yours are a good bit younger. What are the ages of yours?
7, 5, and 1.
7, 5, and 1. And
7,
mine,
6, and 1.
7, 6, and 1. Mine are 13, 12, 7, and 5.
Mm-hmm.
So shout out to all the parents that are out there listening. Man, I just want to first start by saying you rock. Just the fact that you would take time to listen to a podcast on parenting shows the type of parent you want to be and are striving to be.
That's
it's
true.
a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
Most parents that are doing bad jobs don't care about stuff like this.
That's very true.
So the fact that you're leaned in and care is a big deal. We're going to try to hit some things that I feel like are right where parents are these days. And this is how I'd like to set it up. As I've heard people use this phrase when talking about their children later in life. I don't know where I went wrong. Or they're shocked when their kids become something.
Where did they learn that from?
Where did they get that?
Right.
And, we live in a wild day. 2023, we have to say, is one of the wildest times
crazy.
Really in human history.
I would say so.
And that's not an overstatement. I know
Not
people say it's always been wild. Yeah, but have you seen 2023? I mean, good gosh, it's so crazy out there. The themes that people are being exposed to, the conversations we're having, it's just different.
The moral deficit in our culture, the exposure to things that kids weren't exposed to just 5-10 years ago, how much we're connected via social and what we're exposed to, not just on a monthly basis, but on a daily basis, nearly minute by minute. And we do live in a wild world. It's a crazy time to raise kids, for sure.
And I mean, let's be honest, each person is made up a certain way, and they're going to become, their DNA, they're going to grow into their DNA. They're going to be whatever their code tells them to become.
Right.
But there's also a huge part of nurturing
That's right.
that is creating who our kids are. And so when our kids become something later in life, part of it is who they were made to be, but then a huge part of it is what we're doing right now as parents to shape them. It's really like agriculture, the environments that they're in, the stuff that whether they're getting enough sunshine, water, all the stuff we're nurturing. And the scriptures in Proverbs says, train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they're not going to depart from it. So I guess the purpose of this podcast, honestly, is to keep parents from being shocked when their kids turn into something that they didn't want them to be.
That's great. That's great. And I'm more convinced more than ever right now. I think our greatest responsibility, the greatest work we'll do as parents is within the 4 walls of our home, nurturing our children. Just like Proverbs 22, you just said it, training up our children in the way they should go. Training up doesn't just mean taking them to church on Sunday. It means caring for their heart, pastoring them, shepherding them, caring about what they're exposed to, the relationships they're in, the environments that they find themselves in. I think this is the real-time advice that parents need for sure.
All right, so I want to give you 4 things that are influencing who your child is becoming. So, like if you're studying their behavior and you're shocked at what you're seeing with them, there are really 4 major contributing factors. And let's talk about each one of them. Sure. Maybe I'm going to give you all 4 first, and then we'll dive into each one.
Great.
The first one is what they consume. So your child is becoming what they consume. Second, your child is becoming the conversations that they are having. Third, they are becoming the environments that they are in. And fourth, they are becoming the friends that they are with. So all four of these are so true. I can't wait to talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, I see it in the life of my children. They are what they consume. What they put in is what they put out. So I guess, what do you mean, and how would you explain, like, they are becoming what they're consuming? They're exposed to so much. How are they becoming the things that they're watching, what they're hearing, and what they're exposed to?
Well, I mean, you can see in small illustrations, like they sing the songs that they watch. Mm-hmm. They use the accents and like. What shocks me about my kids is their ability to quote movies.
Right.
Like, bro, they lock in this stuff. And I guess the older you get, you don't have the ability. You've seen so much, heard so much, but everything is like brand new to them. Mm-hmm. So they watch a movie, and by the second time, they're quoting the movie. It's wild. They can do the accents. They can sing the songs with all the lyrics. And so their worldviews are being shaped by this content that they're consuming. So as a parent, if I'm not filtering what they're consuming, then I'm letting them become what's feeding them. That's true. Sadly, the content creators right now in the world, so many of them have certain ideologies that they're trying to push hard.
Yep.
They're trying to train children to think certain ways, act certain ways. So they're doing it in such discreet ways through cartoons, cute, funny cartoons. And you have to be so like on your game to hear. And I say in three ways. Number one, themes.
Right.
Themes of, and I'll give you an example, themes that, hey, dads are sloppy, not respectable. You know, you can be this way to parents, themes like that, listening for it. Second is images and how sensitive they are to images. It's said that most kids have exposure to pornography by the age 8.
Unbelievable.
But you just think about seeing pornography as an 8-year-old and what that does to a child's mind and how they view sexuality. I mean, the way that it imbues the way that it impacts how they view their own sexuality and what they're becoming. Right. It's so wild. And then the third is philosophies. Just all shows, all content that they're consuming is woven in certain philosophies. Let's just say evolution, for example. You're watching a show, and it's factual that the world is 16 billion years old. And so where I'm teaching my kids that the Lord created the heavens and the earth. And so we have this clash of ideologies. So they are becoming what content they consume. So have you seen this play out in your kids?
100%. I think you nailed it in the songs that they sing. I think specifically the images that they see. Think about how many times you're laying in bed at night, putting your kids to bed, and they're struck with fear about something that they saw.
Oh, yeah.
And you're having to talk them through that because they were exposed to something that incited fear in their hearts. I see it all the time, every day, and it's so important that we guard against it.
So, you know, where's this content coming? Where is it coming from?
Right.
It's coming from devices. Let's just talk real quick about devices. I have parents ask me, you know, when should I give my kid a phone? When should I? And this is such a huge question. I see some kids at 5 years old walking around with a phone and full data plan.
Glued to their face.
And then I know some parents that are like, my kid's not having a device until they're 15.
Right.
And I and myself and Angie have leaned towards push it off as far as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
And breadcrumb it, because, you know, my daughter Evie is 13. She has an iPad, and she had an iPad when she was 8 years old. And that iPad had severe restrictions. Like she was able to have her grandma's contact and her papa's contact. Right. And then when she was 11, she got a watch, an Apple Watch that was connected to that. And then when she was 12, she got a phone. But by the time she's 12, and she hadn't for years had it, so she's not even close to as addicted as an adult is. She honestly loses her phone. She doesn't know where it's at, but it's so locked down that
it really doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. And she started to notice that certain friends have social media and she doesn't, which the way that I have raised our kids so far is I'm pushing the social media thing as far into their teenage, mid-teenage, upper teenage years. And there are some philosophies of thought that say, hey, walk with them through those years of social media so that they'll know how to fly when they don't have you. I have felt like that the peer pressure and the negative impacts of social media on their young minds are detrimental.
It's incredibly true.
And so I've limited our kids' exposure to social media. But I guess what we're talking about is devices and when do you allow them to have it? And I would just say be as reluctant as possible to give them access to devices.
Because once it starts, you can't stop it either. I mean, It's a moving train at that point. I think stats say that at age 10 is when most people get a cell phone. And at age 10, what you're exposed to, what you could see, and how it could shape your worldview from age 10 to the moment you pass is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, just drag your feet.
Yes.
Drag your feet.
As much as you can.
So that's honestly, if you want to know how I raise my kids and how Angie and I have raised our kids, is we've dragged our feet.
I have a question. Do you feel like there is a level where it's too much and there's not trust in your children? Because I feel like a lot of parents probably say, well, I just want to trust my child. But the reality is there a level where there is a collision of, yeah, I'm called to parent, but I want to trust my child? Can you talk about what that would look like?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there comes a time where you feel like, man, I can really trust them with this thing. Maybe it's messaging with family.
That's great.
And then from that point, they may come to you and say, hey, I have this friend. Could I have their contact? And you know who the friend is. You know whether or not you believe that that person is a legit friend, good friend. And so I'd say you slowly expand their permission, and it's based upon your trust. And so I don't think that the two are against each other. I think they work together, and you slowly unfold that through their middle school years and then into their high school years. So devices, and then let's talk about apps. You know, there are apps that a lot of times parents are just free. Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. They're like, I don't know what that app is, but all the kids have it.
Right.
But they don't realize like the
depth
level
of
of content that's on these apps. And it's because people are sharing stuff that's like obscene.
And it takes one click,
just
one swipe when they're sitting on the couch and you're in the kitchen for them to be exposed to something that will completely change the way that they see the world.
Right. I mean, my kids are into this educational app that is a language training app, but the creators of this app are dead set on pushing same-sex, transsexual content. And so through cartoon images and training on language, this app sews in this philosophy. And so if I just blindly say, hey, yeah, just go learn on this education app, and I don't really do my homework and take time to realize what's going on, then they're just getting imprinted with this ideology that this is totally normal. And so, like, I'd say restrict, again, as much as possible. Like, dig your feet in, be reluctant. The third thing is sources. Who is this content coming from? There are certain organizations that are known for producing content with agendas.
Yep, absolutely.
And learning who those sources are and just being super restrictive. You know, something that took me way off guard was YouTube Kids. And, you know, a lot of parents just put it on YouTube Kids and set it and forget it. It's like, hey, just let it play. And if I select these certain themes, it's going to behave itself.
Nope.
It's going to stick within the boundaries and just honor what I set there. And like you can't trust it.
You absolutely can't. I mean, we've experienced that at our house, and even what you see in the commercials between very wholesome YouTube videos is very dangerous. And you can't set it and forget it and walk away. You're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So what's the bottom line with content? Number one, you need to monitor.
Yep.
You said the stat earlier, 85% of parents do not know how to monitor the content.
Yep.
Which means only 15% of parents are actually going into the settings.
Actively.
Going into the settings, going into like screen time. And so if you mess up on this, then your child is going to become something that you hate, and you're going to wonder where the heck it came from. And it's because you didn't do your due diligence, go through the settings, figure out how this stuff could come in and work for it.
And not even just going through the settings, but setting ground rules in your family. I'd love to hear what some of your rules are. Like some of our rules are you don't watch YouTube or anything on a phone if you're not in a room where me and your mother are at. So we don't allow our kids to go upstairs and just get on their phone, sit in their beds, or go in our room or go outside. They have to be monitored actively. And it's not because we don't trust our children. It's because I want to know what you're watching. And if I could hear it and I could see it, then I could guard you from it. But if you're out on your own watching YouTube or watching Netflix, who knows what you're being exposed to? And I will never know about it, but it is shaping the way you see the world and shaping your mind.
I just think parents have to do their best, their most due diligence to understand the technology, to understand the settings and the parameters. And what worked last month may be different this month.
That's right.
Because it's changing. It's ever evolving. They're getting permissions to do stuff that just with one update, what you thought you had control over is no longer what you have control over. So it's like you have to be vigilant and stay on. How do I do this? And then, how much do you control? You don't want, like some parents are like, I don't want to be that controlling parent that never lets, and here's my input, okay? Again, like I said on the last podcast, this is my podcast, so I'm just saying it how I feel it. I think that less is more, way more. And the more you can dig your feet in and not allow access to certain apps, not allow access to certain digital freedoms. And it's like we don't let kids drive cars until they're 16. And there's a reason for that.
Absolutely.
Because they can't handle it. And so I feel the same way about content. I feel 100%. Like just like, hey, till you're 16.
It's better safe than sorry. I mean, the negative consequences, if you're too lenient, are detrimental. Yeah. So I agree 100%.
All right. So second is the conversations that they're having.
Which is what's crazy to think about, the conversations they're having. They spend most of their life apart from us. So the conversations they're having with people, the conversations they're having with us, it really does shape the way that they see the world. And so I'd love to hear about, what does it mean that they're becoming the conversations? They're becoming all of the interactions with the people that they're involved with at school or at church or with your family. So what does it mean to become the conversations?
Okay, so like maybe you've watched a YouTube video of a drag queen sitting in a classroom reading a book to kids that are there, explaining sexuality to kids. That's conversations. So we're all familiar with concrete when it's wet and you put your hand in it and it's forever marked. I feel like certain conversations are holy. Certain conversations are sacred. And sexuality conversations are sacred.
Right.
The first ones they have, they don't forget. If I were to ask you guys, every person that's in this room helping me record this podcast, where were you when you had the first conversation about sexuality, about certain elements of sexuality? You would remember where you were and who said what. And so our children are out there, and obviously you can't be there every waking moment and control every single aspect of their life. Things are gonna be said, but to the best of your ability, controlling and navigating what conversations they're having. It's interesting. One of my kids, the older they get, the more I realize, man, our kids are cool. They're cool kids, but they're sheltered kids. They're very guarded kids, and I think that speaks to my level of protectiveness over their worldview, ideology. But one of them was recently exposed to a conversation around just sexuality, and it impacted them tremendously. They came to me, and thankfully they came to me. They were crying, and something was said to them about something they didn't understand. They asked the person, and the person divulged stuff to them. And I was so glad, number one, that they came to me and was asking and asked my opinion about it. But number two, I was like, rage filled my heart, because I'm like, this is a topic that nobody was supposed to talk to you about. So, I mean, I think rule number one is have the conversation first.
Yeah, so that was going to be a question I was going to ask, is how do you have a conversation with your kids about the conversations that they're having?
Well, so much of it is timing. What a 5-year-old can handle is different than what a 9-year-old can handle. And so if I say I'm going to have all the conversations with my kids when they're 5, they're not ready for all the conversations.
Right. Yeah.
I'll take a second to tell a funny story. So one of my kids came to me and said, "Dad," and mentioned the name of one of our relatives and said, "Dad, he said the F word." And I was like,
please don't be the F word.
I never even used the word F word, so I don't know how,
Right.
So they heard that he says the F word all the time.
Ooh.
I said, "Man," I said, that's horrible. I said, "Baby, what F word?"
Clarify for me.
Yeah. And I was prepared to hear
The worst.
F word.
Yeah.
But they said fart. And they whispered fart, and I was like,
Like it is completely forbidden.
well, this is where it gets real funny. I was like, they did say the F word.
There you go.
I said, that's wrong.
I love it.
But I was like playing into I didn't want to be like, no, that's not it. This
That's
is the
not
real
the real
one.
F word.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just for like 2 years, they thought fart was the worst.
The worst
I'm
word you
cool
could
with that.
say.
Okay. But back to the main point. Having the conversation first. They're not ready at 5 years old for all the conversations. So you have to use discernment and judgment just to see where they're at in the process. And you have a plan and how you're going to tell them. I'll give you an example. My wife and I have discussed how to have conversations about sexuality with our kids. And what we decided worked best for us was there was a book that was very simple. It was written on a child's level, and it explains things in a way that we condone and endorse.
Mm-hmm.
And so we felt like one of our kids were ready to read the book. So we let them read the book, and we said, afterwards, let's have a conversation. So it didn't come down to this huge amount of pressure of us trying to figure out how to explain the birds and the bees. It was like they could read this on their own terms, process it, and then we talked about it with them. And it just made the communication to them super clean, and it made it on their own terms so they didn't have to navigate the social awkwardness of having this
Right.
conversation with my dad. But
And you had it before they were exposed to it at the levels that children are being exposed to it today in school.
Yeah. And I think another piece of advice I'd have is keep your ear to the ground, because most parents are oblivious. They don't know their kids are having these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be in the know. You have to have the relational equity to where your kid would come to you with a question about this stuff.
And building that relational equity for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. When my kid asks questions, I think a natural response when it's something that we feel like is inappropriate or a topic that we didn't feel like was the right time to address for their children, we'll dismiss it and say, I don't want to talk about that right now, as opposed to giving a reason and really going to a place with them where they understand that's not something we want to tackle right now. But what that does is it doesn't dismiss the question. It makes them understand, okay, Dad doesn't want to discuss that, but later.
Yeah.
So it builds the relational equity where they're not afraid to ask questions.
Yeah. And I think every parent needs to have clarity in their mind as to how they would explain it if they ever get put in the crunch.
Right.
And you need to pre-map it out. Like, I knew how I was going to ask Angie to marry me. I had written it out. Like, these are important words. These are important moments. And so I would say, get your head around how you think about this stuff, because you're going to have the conversation, and it'd be great if you had it first.
Absolutely.
Okay. The third, they're becoming the environments that they're in. And it is so true. This means the school that they're a part of, the hobbies they're in, the extracurricular activities. I've heard phenomenal stories about camps that kids have gone to that impacted them forever, conferences that they were in. But then I've heard horror stories of things. Hey, I was on this trip with these kids, and man, this was done to me, or this happened to me. And they never get beyond that. And the truth is, where the heck was the dad?
Right.
Where was the mom? Why didn't they stop their kid from going on this moment? And obviously, we're not going to parent perfectly. There's going to be things, oversights, but man, you got to be so protective of the environment that your kids are in.
And how do you use discernment in understanding what is a good environment and what is a bad environment? Because there might be a seemingly good environment, but maybe something takes place in that good environment that actually harms your child. So how, as a parent, do you use discernment, obviously guidance from the Holy Spirit, but how do you say yes to this and no to this? How do you choose this, but don't choose this for your child?
So much of it is Holy Spirit, intuition, discernment, knowing who's leading the event.
That's great, yeah.
Because sometimes where I see parents miss it a lot of times is they would rather have the free night and have the lazy way out and send their kid because they just need a break than actually discern. And so I've seen kids go to sleepovers.
I was about to say, can we talk practically and talk about sleepovers?
Okay, yeah. So sleepovers. Send your kid off to this sleepover, and some weird uncle comes to the house.
Yep.
Okay, this is real life stuff that happens to people.
Absolutely, every day.
And so, but the parents are like, yeah, well, we get a free date night or we get a night off, and so yeah, I'm sure I trust those people. I always care about who is leading the event. Can I trust the person who's over it?
Yes.
It's not a Boy Scouts trip I'm sending my kids on that I don't know. Who's this guy that's overseeing? Who's a part of this thing? And I have gut checks. You know, if I look at somebody and I feel like I don't want my kid around this person or this, then it's a no.
Yep.
The tough thing is dealing with the kid's reaction to that no, because they may really want to do it, but I love them way too much.
100%.
To send them into an environment that's wrong like that. So, you know, we're not just talking about events, we're talking about schools.
Right. And I guess talk about that. Obviously, there's the battle between public school, private school, and that's a difficult conversation to have because obviously you're nurtured differently in a private school than you would be in a public school. What does that look like? How does a parent who has their kid in public school and is experiencing something that's harmful to their child, or they feel like they need to get their child into private school, but they maybe can't afford it? What would you say to someone who is battling back and forth between private, public school in terms of the environment that their children are in?
Well, you can tell that people care about the public school education because parents will move to different states just to put their kids in certain public school systems. And I don't fault them for that. I honestly feel like you have one time to train and raise your kids, and knowing where and who they're going to be with is so important. Obviously, finances come into play. Public school options are free. And some people, they say that's the only way I can go. I have pretty radical views on all of it because I think I'm speaking for the majority. There's a minority who this doesn't apply to, but for the majority, most people are chasing more money.
Right.
And so because they're chasing more money, they're not willing to do different options. They're not willing to homeschool. They're not willing because we got to both be in careers, or or they're not willing to pay tuition for their child to have a private education. And so they go with the easiest route that's possible. And I'm just telling you, if you send your kid into a bad public school scenario, that environment, even if it doesn't influence them to be something that they wouldn't have been, you're going to see the persecution, the bullying, the shaming, the rejection, the way that it impacts them emotionally, psychologically. So I guess my counsel would be is get in the best school district you can possibly get in intentionally. Settle for less in terms of your living environment. Some people just want a bit nicer car, nicer house. I would rather somebody live in a trailer and have their kid in the right environment than to live in a mansion and have their kid in a bad environment. So be content with less. And yeah, don't rule out options like homeschool and
of course.
And private school. So, yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of things that come into play when you're choosing education, but I think you're spot on. I think the importance of having them in an environment that's healthy for them far outweighs some of the other, what we would consider negative consequences of not making as much money or not being able to do this or that. So I think you're spot on. Can we talk about friends?
Yeah.
They're becoming the friends they are with. When I think about my 3 children, mainly my 7 and my 6-year-old, they're constantly connected with their friends, having conversations with their friends, and they're young and innocent at this stage, but you do become the people you hang around with. And so talk to me a little bit about that. What does it look like for your children to become the people that they are primarily surrounded by?
Well, you can tell with your kids, even at your kids' age, 7, 6, that they giggle like the friends they hang out with.
Yeah.
They use the same expressions.
It's very true.
You can tell who they've been hanging out with.
That's so true.
Like with my kids, I know who they've been hanging out with because of the way they talk, and we're so impressionable. I was like that when I was a kid. Whoever was the coolest kid in the class or whoever was the coolest kid in the neighborhood, I began to emulate who they were.
Yeah.
And it's because we're influenceable. And, some of the studies say that parents don't hold the number one spot of most influential in their kid's life, but actually friends hold the most influential. So parents think that they're number one. What I'm telling my kids is that's what
gospel.
they're believing.
That matters, right?
And what I tell them is values. They're taking that to the bank, but actually they're more impressionable from their friends than they are from parents. Wow. So if parents really love their kids and really want to shape their friends, they spend more time intentionally choosing their friends. And my 7-year-old doesn't know how I'm shaping the relationships that are in his life, but he'll look back and realize that I was. Mm-hmm. I'm intentionally putting him in environments where certain kids are. And the kids that I select for him to be friends with are kids that come from similar value systems where the parents and I are very similar in our values. Mm-hmm. To where I don't have this weird feeling that this is another kid that has exposure to conversations, exposure to content, exposure to philosophies that are different than my worldview, to where my kid is being impacted. So I'm choosing environments that are very similar in value.
Right.
And I guess the best illustration, you remember when Abraham he moved into the promised land. He was far away from his homeland, but it came time for Isaac to get married, and God said, don't let him marry somebody from here. So he sent his servant back to his homeland and said, choose a woman from there to come. Mm-hmm. It's because that connection is so valuable, the value connection. So I think helping to steer your kids' relationships, who comes to the parties, who's at the play dates, who do you say yes to if they want to go to a party? And these are hard topics. These are hard conversations because inevitably I'm saying some kids are not going to hang out with my kids.
Right.
But I'm shaping a world changer. I'm shaping yeah.
Looking back on your life, because I'm sure your parents were very intentional about choosing your friends and choosing the relationships that you were in, do you see now, looking back in hindsight, how that affected how you were raised and how you grew up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents, I could pinpoint a few times where I feel like they saved my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's the importance of it. Like your life depends on it. And I think right now we think it's such a small thing, but when the compounding year after year and your child is 35, they are a product of the people that they surrounded themselves with when they were in junior high and in high school. So being so intentional now doesn't just affect the now, but it affects the future. And so
I remember one specific time in my childhood. There was a kid that lived in the neighborhood, and we hit it off. We had a cool friendship, played soccer, did different things. And my parents had this day where they were like, "Hey, we don't want you to hang out with him anymore." And I was like, I was hurt, I was confused, and I said, "Why not?" And honestly, they couldn't explain it. And so I just had to go with it. Well, he would come over, knock on the door, and they'd say, "Hey, buddy, he can't come out. He can't come out and play." And I've never forgot that. I've never forgot his name. I've never forgot their sternness in choosing that. There was never an explanation to him because it would have been hurtful for sure. But to me, it was just that they didn't want us to spend time together anymore. And come to find out, this kid had magazines, and they knew he had magazines, and they were scared that I was going to see something that I shouldn't see. Wow. They were so dead right.
Yeah.
So they didn't want me going into their house. And that's another thing. Like, people's homes are crazy places. And in neighborhoods, sometimes parents let their kids just run and go into whose ever house. And that's such a scary thing, because you never know what content's being played, the personalities that are in those homes, the spiritual environments of those homes. So I just have a general rule: you go in nobody's house, period, and stay outside. Yeah. So what a big topic, what a huge topic, a topic where everybody's got opinions too. So forgive me if I've stepped on your toes in any way that's uncomfortable and maybe goes against your perspective, but you know what? These are mine. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me be part of the conversation. I feel like I've learned a ton myself. So.
All right, guys, we will see you next time on the podcast.